Hey, good evening and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. Hey, we're in video number 38 of our study of Matthew 16, 27 and 28. And tonight I want to demonstrate that the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 16 is the gathering of the wheat, and the tares, or the separation of the wheat and the tares, however we want to say it, of Matthew 13 at the end of the Jewish age at the time of the resurrection harvest of Israel. Now, in order to demonstrate this, we need to once again go through somewhat of a parallel study. So, if you recall from our previous videos, we established that Matthew 24 and 25 and the coming of the Son of Man in that united Olivet discourse was parallel to the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 16, 27 and 28. They are perfectly parallel passages. I'm going to show you, based upon another parallel chart here, that the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 16, Matthew 24 and 25, and the events at the end of the age harvest of Matthew 13 are all parallel passages concerning the coming of the Son of Man as the second coming of Christ in AD 70. Now watch this. All three of these passages, Matthew 16, Matthew 13, Matthew 24, 25, concern these common elements. Number one, they concern the coming of the Son of Man. And by the way, once again, Matthew 13 doesn't specifically tell us that is the coming of the Son of Man, but that imagery of harvest with the angels on the clouds, etc., is found in Revelation 14, where we see one like a Son of Man on the clouds of heaven with a sharp sickle, and he's reaping the harvest of Israel. So same imagery. It concerns the coming of the Son of Man. The second parallel in all three passages is that all three passages concern judgment. Matthew 24, 25, we have the judgment of in the separation of the sheep and the goats. Matthew 13, we have the same judgment of the same people, just using different imagery. It is the separation or the judgment of the wheat and the tares. And of course, in Matthew 16, 27, it is the judgment of all men. Third parallel is that all three passages concern the presence of angels. The Son of Man comes with his angels, or sends forth his angels for this judgment harvest. Number five, the fourth parallel that all three passages concern is the establishment of the kingdom. And finally, all three passages place all of these elements at the end of the Jewish age, at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Both Matthew 13 and specifically Matthew 24 place these events at the end of the age, which agrees with Jesus in Matthew 16, 28. Some of you standing here will not taste death till you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Some of them were still alive at the end of the Jewish age in AD 70 and saw and realized and understood the fulfillment of these events. Now, just to further vindicate these parallels and the fact that Matthew 16, 27 and 28 is parallel to the second coming of Christ in both Matthew 24, 25 and Matthew 13, I want us to notice that Matthew 13 and 43, verse 43, which speaks of the time when the saints receive the kingdom, is universally acknowledged by futurists to be drawing from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, at the time of the resurrection. Let me read Matthew 13, 40 through 43 for context sake. It says this: "So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age." Again, that's the end of the Jewish age, obviously, the same age Jesus was living and speaking in. "The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Watch 43. "Then," see, at the end of the age, "then the righteous will shine forth as the sun," or as the brightness, "in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Well, they were called to hear because this was an allusion back to the prophet Daniel, as I said, which is universally acknowledged. So Daniel 12, notice what it says in verses 1 through 3. "Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued." Now, just a point here, Jesus alludes to this specific verse in Matthew 24, verse 21, and applies it to the Great Tribulation just prior to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Okay, so this context is a first century context. Let's go on. Verse 2, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, those to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. This is the time of the resurrection following the great tribulation in the first century. And watch this. At this time, verse 3 takes place. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. That's exactly where Jesus was drawing from in Matthew 13:43. This is the time, at the time of the resurrection following the great tribulation of the first century, when the saints inherit the kingdom. That places, once again, Matthew 13 at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, but it connects the coming of the Son of Man at that time with the time of the resurrection. Okay? That is significant because remember, if Matthew 24:25, Matthew 16:27-28, and Matthew 13:37 through 43 are all parallel passages concerning the coming of the Son of Man, that means that at the end of the Jewish age in AD 70, when the Son of Man came, the saints received the kingdom and they received their reward through their resurrection. And guess what? Daniel 12 also places this great tribulation at the time of the resurrection, at the time when the saints received the kingdom, at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. In verse 4 through 7, Daniel is told to seal these words until the time of the end. Well, what end? The end of the Jewish age. Then Daniel asks, when will these things be accomplished? And he's told in verse 7, listen to this. I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, and he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever that it would be for a time, times, and a half a time. See, following the great tribulation of verse 1 in chapter 12, it would be for a time, time, and a half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, as soon as this great tribulation was fully accomplished, all these events would be completed. The holy people, which was Daniel's brothers of Judah and Jerusalem, it was the Jewish nation, when the power of that nation, their covenant union with Jehovah, was fulfilled, accomplished, and removed, following the great tribulation of the first century, the time of the resurrection, when the saints received the kingdom, would be fully accomplished. That agrees perfectly with the time limitation that Jesus placed upon Matthew 16, Matthew 13, and Matthew 24 and 25. The coming of the Son of Man, which was the second coming of Christ, in fulfillment of Daniel 12, Matthew 16, Matthew 13, Matthew 24, and 25, was accomplished at the shattering of the power of the holy people at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. And that was the time when the gathering of the wheat and the tares took place, the separation of the righteous from the wicked, when the saints received the kingdom and the wicked were cast out from the presence of Jehovah. Well, that's all for now. Hope that's been a blessing. I will upload these charts to the website so you can get a visual of these powerful connections. The second coming of Christ was fulfilled at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Let's proclaim it. Praise God. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.